Hello, this is Joy Workshop, and today's class is the burden of happiness. So, try to think about the last time you had an argument with your partner, or the last time that a situation did not go as planned, and maybe you were unhappy. You were unhappy with the circumstances. Now, try to think about Christmas. So usually there's two kinds of people, the kind of people that had wonderful Christmases when they were children and they miss them. And then there's a kind of people that had miserable Christmases when they were children. And somehow they find a way, even if their Christmases are great now, they miss their Christmases, or they cry because their Christmases were so horrible and they remember them. But anyways, behind all of this, there's comparison. And so we have this a perfectly good moment, and then we just question this moment, and then we shrink it and shrink it and shrink it and turn it into nothing. And then the joy is killed. It's just gone. So there's even a term for the people who hate Christmas is bah humbug. Do you remember that? It comes from Christmas Carol, written by Charles Dickens, and it was Ebenezer Scrooge, the one that is known by this term. But comparison, Mark Twain called comparison the death of joy. So, and Theodore Roosevelt called the thief of joy. There, in the religious world, they call it the sin of comparison. So what happens when we compare is that there's two alternatives. That which we compare is better than or worse than. And so if today is better than something, then that something becomes sad. And if today is worse, then today becomes even worse. And so when something is better, it becomes a source of superiority. And when something is worse, it becomes a source of inferiority. But it's a lose-lose situation. And so the first level of comparison could be with our own selves. We could be comparing one present moment with one of our moments in the past, or we could be comparing ourselves to someone else. So that's even more challenging, because there's not only that comparison, there's also envy. And then, so comparison promotes envy, and it promotes greed, and so it just ruins a moment. But it ruins a moment because of ungratitude. So when we accept a moment, then we can enjoy it. But when we start comparing it, then we destroy it, we shrink it, we make it nothing. To remind you, Cain killed Abel because he was envious. So gratitude is a habit that we must practice to be able to celebrate our blessings and the blessings of others. So it's a good practice. So our minds are trained to see what's not right. So at the end of the day, many people think, oh, this went wrong, and this was a disaster, and this was a disaster, and oh my God, I can't believe this happened. And so if at the end of the day we practice gratitude, we start focusing on the things that went right. So what's going on with happiness? So what's the difference between happiness and joy? So happiness and unhappiness are two sides of the same coin. Why? Because they have to do with what is happening. So happiness comes from the root hap, which means luck or fortune. And so happiness has to do with enjoying the circumstances, and unhappiness has to do with not enjoying the circumstances. So if we have what we want, we're happy. If that is taken away from us, we are unhappy. So it's a trap. And so it's basically, if I'm pretty, I'm happy. If I'm ugly, I'm sad. If I'm rich, I'm happy. If I'm poor, I'm sad. If I'm healthy, I'm happy. If I'm sick, I'm sad. The trick is to have joy, and joy comes from within and needs to be cultivated. It needs to be grown. It needs to be trained. We need to train our brains. So there are other alternatives to happiness. For example, contentment. Contentment is contained. And when someone is content, the definition is that they're satisfied with their present condition. It doesn't describe the condition. It could be good or bad. And so there's, for example, serenity. Serenity is a word that has been branded by the world of addictions because of the Serenity Prayer. But it's called the Serenity Prayer. It's not called the Happiness Prayer. And so serenity has to do with accepting the circumstances, even if they're challenging. Another example I want to give you about this not being satisfied, and it's never enough. It's a story. It's called The Fisherman's Wife, and it's about this fisherman who goes to the ocean and he finds this magic flounder, and he's enchanted. And so the flounder talks to the fisherman, and he says if he needs anything, and the fisherman says no, thank you. And then when he comes home, the wife says, so how was your day? And he said, well, I found this magic fish. And she said, you didn't ask for anything? And so he goes back, and they at the beginning they live in a shack, and then she wants a nice cottage, and after the cottage she wants a palace, and after the palace she wants to be king and queen, and then she wants to be emperor and empress, and it never ends. And so in the end they go back to the shack. So greed ruins happiness, because when something is not enough, we want something else. And if we don't train ourselves to be happy with what we have, then when we have what we want, we will still not be happy. Because if joy comes from within, if I have what I want, or if I don't have what I want, it really doesn't make much of a difference. I want to read you a little quote from The Art of Happiness by the Dalai Lama, and it has to do with greed. So here it is. One interesting thing about greed is that although the underlying motive is to seek satisfaction, the irony is that even after obtaining the object of your desire, you are still not satisfied. The true antidote of greed is contentment. If you have a strong sense of contentment, it doesn't matter whether you obtain the object or not. Either way, you are still content. So one of the challenges about greed or desire, greed is probably a more Christian word, and desire is more used in an Oriental perspective, more of a Buddhist perspective. The thing about desire is that desire never ends. So if I want a handbag, I get it. But then when I have it, I'm going to want another one, because fashion is pretty smart. So once you get what you want, guess what? You will want more. So the wanting is the thing that needs to be questioned. And there's nothing wrong with wanting stuff, but the attachment is what brings misery. Because if you don't have what you want, that's when you are unhappy. So I will share with you, there was a Harvard study conducted for 75 years. There were 4 researchers involved because of how long it was. It involved 724 men. And so the researchers, of course, focus on different areas. But one of the things they discovered is that the least happy year is year 45. It's in the middle, because young people have ideas about the future, of all these incredible accomplishments. And then old people maybe realize that maybe they did not become astronauts, or did not get the Nobel Prize, and did not work for the United Nations, and they're okay with it. People who are in the middle, people who are making things happen, sometimes they're stressed out because they don't know if everything's going to be resolved in a positive manner. But the truth is that it doesn't matter where you're at. We should just enjoy the process. If we're young and we're looking for the future, we should be excited now. If we're middle-aged, we should be excited now for all the things that we have accomplished, and for appreciating for what's still yet to come. And if we're old, we should be satisfied with our lives. But the happiness and joy, especially joy, is in the present moment. If you are in the past, you will be depressed. If you are in the future, you will be anxious. Happiness and true joy is only found in the present moment. Another skill that is useful to have happiness is to self-soothe. This is learned from a very early age. When infants are 6 months old, they can learn to start self-soothing, because in the middle of the night, if they learn to cry themselves and calm themselves down, they will do better. If every time they cry, they get what they want, and they get attention, or they get food, or they're fed, then that could lead into having eating disorders, and then having immediate satisfaction, that could lead into the endless fast highway of addictions. And so it is important to tame our emotions, to be calm, to regulate our emotions. So what about unhappiness? Unhappiness has to do with grief, misery, sadness, gloom, melancholy, and nostalgia. And this state comes from like I said, the good fortune that we had is taken away from us. So how can we prevent unhappiness? One of the ways is to conquer unhappiness, is to not be afraid to be sad. And if you think about it, when do people start questioning their happiness? It's usually when something was taken away from them, when they are sad. When we are sad, then we think about, where is this true joy coming from? And then if we do train ourselves to think differently, then we can produce that joy even in challenging circumstances. There's a little Buddhist story, and it's about this woman who loses her son, and she's very sad, and they tell her to go talk to the Buddha. And she asks him, how can I overcome this grief? And he says, you know what, bring me 5 mustard seeds from houses where no one has died. And she's like, I'll be right back. And she goes to these homes and she asks everybody, do you have a mustard tree? Yes. Well, has anybody died? And then they start telling her the story. And after a while, she comes back to the Buddha and she says, now I understand. And so shared pain is less painful, because once we share pain, we realize that it's just part of life. And finally, the last example I want to give you has to do with Oscar Wilde. Oscar Wilde was very successful in every area. He was wealthy, he was an aristocrat, he was handsome, he had a wife, that was not enough, he had girlfriends, boyfriends, all of it. And at one point he had to go to prison. That's where he wrote this book called De Profundis. And that's when he realized that he had never been sad. He had never not had everything he wanted. And this was a really special time in his life. And so this quote comes from that book. And it is, I confined myself so exclusively to the trees of what seemed to me the sunlit side of the garden, and shunned the other side for its shadow and its gloom. So it was only at the end of his life that he had the opportunity to explore the mystic life, art and nature in a more profound way. And so he was only in prison for 2 years, and then he died. He died very young at 46. So in order for us to have joy, we have to train ourselves, and we have to think, what story are we telling ourselves? The circumstances are not the story. The circumstances don't mean anything. They mean the meaning we give to them. So if we decide to tell ourselves a better story, we're going to be happier. And a simple example would be the weather. People are always complaining about the weather. If it's hot, because it's hot. If it's cold, because it's cold. And the truth is that if we're here now, if it's hot, enjoy the heat. If it's cold, enjoy the cold. If it's raining, enjoy the rain. And so that's it. This is how we create joy. So think about, a little homework would be to think about when you're happy, and when you stop being happy, usually your story changes. You might be in a moment, and then you start comparing that moment to another moment, and you stop enjoying it. So happiness is in the present moment, and I hope you cultivate joy. It takes every day we have to work at it. It comes and goes, but the more we work at it, the more we can have it. So thank you for listening.